Leaving that corporate job and having all of our real estate investments, but creating my own business, my own active income allows me to, and Luke, to give our kids like a 2-parent, stay-at-home parent experience. Like sometimes we ride together to go pick them up in the afternoon. And one of these days that's going to start embarrassing them.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today, I'm here with Avery Carl. Avery is the author of Amazon's bestseller, Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth, Your Guide to Analyzing, Buying, and Managing Vacation Properties. She's the host of the Short Term Show podcast and the CEO of the Short Term Shop and one of the country's top short-term rental and Airbnb real estate agencies. So, Avery, your bio is long. You have a ton of success and things to talk about, but I really just like to let it come from the guests' own words. So first, I'll just say thank you for coming on the show today. I'm really excited to talk and let our listeners get to know you better.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just start with kind of your background, a little bit about that and what got you to where you are today, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, sure. So I got into real estate investing kind of accidentally. I went to University of Texas and graduated at the worst time to ever graduate in terms of being able to get jobs, which was spring of 2009. So we were full swing of the Great Recession, and especially for soft majors like me, I was a communication major. And so I'd always played in bands and things. So there were no jobs. So I just rode the band wagon for a few years. So I toured in sloppy punk bands playing guitar for several years, bartended to supplement that income because there is no income. It's actually negative income. And got to go all over the world, ended up living in New York City for a little while where I met my husband. The real estate journey sort of started when we moved from New York to Nashville. So I went back to get my master's after the job market kind of swung back around a little bit. And I got a job working in what I thought was my dream position in the music business, which pays basically nothing because it's sexy and there's always an intern who will do it for free. And they make sure you know that when they're hiring you. So when we moved from Brooklyn to Nashville, our real estate agent at the time was really trying to get us to buy in this super hip, fast appreciating area of Nashville called East Nashville, the Portland of Nashville, if you will. And we were like, no, thanks. We are moving from Brooklyn to Tennessee. We are getting away from neighbors. We're going out in the country. So we bought a house out in the country and kind of didn't really think about that again. And fast forward a few months, this was in 2012 or 13. And my husband and I, we just got married. We'd saved up just enough, like very little money, like $10,000. But to us at the time, it was a lot of money. And I was super into personal finance. I was reading all the Dave Ramsey books. I just was really trying to make sure that we got off to a good start financially. And so we decided to go to a financial advisor and see what we should do with this $10,000. So we didn't know anything about anything. And so we just went to the Edward Jones office that was in the same building as my job. And the financial advisor who worked there very unceremoniously told us that we did not have enough money for her to bother with. So the wind was completely let out of our sails. We're like, I guess we're losers. Let's just go to the bar. So we went to the bar and we're sitting there thinking like, there's got to be something you can do with $10,000. And we started thinking about the houses in East Nashville. And this was way back when Nashville was actually affordable and you could get $150,000 house. You cannot do that anymore. But back then we thought, well, maybe if we bought one of those houses and we'd have to save up a little more money for the down payment, but what if we bought one and put a renter in it and they're paying the mortgage, they're paying the utilities. And in 25 years, when our future kids need to go to college, we'll be able to sell that house and pay for their college out of the appreciation. And we're these great financial geniuses because we're not having to pay out of pocket for college, which is not a good reason to invest. That strategy was very dumb, but it worked out for us. So we saved up another 5,000. My husband, he still does this part-time, but back then he was a full-time classic rock DJ on Sirius XM. And so he would take these gigs hosting like themed cruises. So they have like a hair metal cruise, they have a Kiss cruise, all these things. So he would take these gigs hosting that, and it would pay like $5,000 at a time. So we were able to save that up. I put us on a $20 a day budget each, aside from that, to save up as much as we could, as quickly as we could, to buy one of these houses. And so we bought one. Did not even know it was called real estate investing. Most people do the research first. We did it backwards. We bought the house first. And we actually got really lucky with that house. So the mortgage was $647 a month, and we were able to rent it out for $1,550 a month. So almost $1,000 in cash flow on a long-term rental. That's pretty good. So then we realized that, coincidentally, after all the deductions and taxes and insurance that comes out of my paycheck back then, that I was making about the same amount every month as this house was, commuting from the country to Nashville, an hour each way, Nashville traffic, and hating my job. My boss was never a fan of me. And I'm just not a good employee. I'll be the first one to admit it. Like, my boss should not have liked me. I was an idiot. That's probably everything that's wrong with millennials in the workplace. I'll say that. So we're like, wait a minute. This is making as much money as me when I'm spending all this time working. We need more of these. We need to build a business out of this. So only then did we read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and read books and listen to podcasts and actually research real estate investing. And we knew we wanted to buy another one, but we thought, well, what can we buy that's going to make us the most amount of money the fastest so that we can buy more? And we landed on short-term rentals. This was 2015 now. So again, well before COVID, well before the Airbnb boom. And we knew we didn't want to do it in Nashville because the regulations in Nashville were very anti-short-term rental. But we'd just been on vacation to the Great Smoky Mountains, which is about 4 hours east of Nashville. So Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge area. We'd stayed in a rental cabin. Our friends that came with us stayed in rental cabins. So we figured, well, that's probably a pretty good place to start. Somebody owns all these rental cabins in Gatlinburg. So we went down that road. And long story short, we bought one. And again, there were no YouTube videos on this back then. There were no gurus to teach you how to do it. We couldn't afford one anyway, if there were. And we just kind of figured out how to do it. And we scaled one short-term rental there into 5 over the course of about 18 months. And after we got those 5, we started throwing in a long-term rental here and there. We're investing in Chattanooga. And now, I guess, how many years later is that? So 29 years later, we've got 250 doors across multiple states. 8 of them are short-term rentals, which sounds like not that many comparatively to the rest of our portfolio, but volume, like dollar volume wise, it's about a little closer to 50-50. So like our average long-term door is maybe $80,000 and our average price for a short-term door is like $800,000. So over the course of that time, I built the short-term shop, which is our active income. I think a lot of people, active income gets so much hate when it comes to, the podcast world and the YouTube world. But so it's a real estate brokerage or team brokered by EXP, and we help people find short-term rentals and we teach them how to manage them. So we've got offices in 20 markets. We've sold over $3.5 billion in short-term rental properties, helped over 5,000 people become financially independent through investing in real estate. And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, that's a impressive nutshell, but I think that a couple of things that you touched on that I think are maybe important to highlight. One, I know you bought that first house, kind of not knowing anything. And I know you said that's not the best strategy. However, I would say it's not necessarily a bad strategy in the sense, like if you, it's probably not a scalable strategy, but if people want to get started, I think importantly, people need to know to take action. I think, that you can do all the research in the world and get stuck in analysis paralysis and then not do anything. But the fact that you just did something, it's a bit of a timing issue where it was probably more accessible then to where you could, as you said, you could buy a house for 150,000 in an area that probably is now like $1 million or something. I don't know what the what the cost to get into East Nashville is now, but getting started makes a lot of sense. I also, and I guess I wouldn't have thought this, but you said you have 250 doors, but only 8 of them are short-term rentals, and I think that maybe speaks to diversification. It speaks to someone who's known as a expert in the short-term rental space. You would, I think probably other people would assume like, oh, she's got, everything is going to be short-term rentals. And I want to maybe talk about your perspective on why that is. But the other thing that you mentioned that I think is important to touch on too is the active income, and people hate on active income and stuff. And I think that the reality is you almost, unless you're already, sort of extremely wealthy, there has to be some level of active income. So it's kind of, figuring out where that comes from. But let's just start with your portfolio and sort of why it's structured the way it is, and your thoughts on, kind of just that makeup of what you've decided to invest in.
Yeah. So we started with long terms, and the entire point of buying that first short term was so we could buy more long terms and apartment buildings. And the short terms did obviously really well. And when we got to that 5th one, we said, well, now that we've got this cash flow coming in, we're not going to notice. It's not going to hit the bank account as hard throwing out, a $20,000 down payment on $100,000 single families, or 25 on $100,000 duplexes here and there. So we just started sprinkling them in, and then COVID hit. And so at that point we had 5 short terms, or maybe 6 short terms, 5 maybe. And I think we're at like 25 long-term doors. And we were like, oh, thank God, the other shoe finally dropped on the short terms, but good thing we have these long terms in case, tourism just dies during this and they shut everything down. But what actually happened is we all laid around and watched Tiger King for 2 weeks, and then it was the opposite of what I thought was going to happen. Our short terms boomed, but then over here we had to worry about eviction moratoriums in our long terms. Now, luckily for us, neither one of those things happened. We didn't have any evictions or need to evict anybody that couldn't pay. And our short term shut down for 2 weeks, but then they were back up and running in the markets that we were in almost immediately. But it was really nice during those 2 weeks where nobody knew what was happening. I was like ordering Chick-fil-A from DoorDash and spraying it down and disinfecting it. Like nobody knew what was going to happen. So it was really nice in that time to know whichever way this pendulum swings, we're going to be okay. Yeah. So I've never forgotten that feeling of sitting there looking at, I had an 18-month-old of, okay, we're just going to sit here for 2 weeks and hang out, and it's going to be fine either way. And I know a lot of people did not have that comfort. And so I've never forgotten looking at her and feeling like, okay, we've properly taken care of you. So, and it's good to even, I feel like a lot of people, they're either long-term people or they're short-term people. You don't see very many at all crossing over. Most of our friends who invest in long terms don't have any short terms, and we've got friends who have 45 short terms and they just aren't interested in doing the other. I really like diversification. So if you're only going to invest in short terms, at least diversify across markets. But I do like having the diversification of long terms. And I think that a lot of people, single family long term gets so crapped on by the real estate investing community. But if you do it at scale, so if you keep buying them and don't stop, it really does add up. So it's not attractive when their first investment is a short-term rental and they're making several $1,000s a month, to then go buy a long-term rental where it's $500 a month if you're lucky. But if you just keep going with those, then you end up with a lot of cash flow. So I like a little bit of everything. It's not for everybody. Some people, long-term rental investors, don't have the stomach for the customer service side, the hospitality side of short
Yeah.
terms. But what I like about short terms is that they're kind of a gateway drug, not into just real estate investing, but running a business of any kind, which kind of segues into your question about active income.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can we'll touch on the active income thing. I think the other piece that maybe you can speak to in that, diversification is just a management. As you said, it's a business, right? You're in a business with these short-term rentals. Arguably, you're in a business with long-term rentals as well, depending on what level of management you have. But like, you're not going to have the turnover in a long-term rental type of scenario that you were going to have in these short-term stays. So I'm sure there's something to that there. But yeah, talk a bit about sort of that active side and running a business and just that I guess you weren't a realtor to start, so it's kind of somewhere along the way you sort of moved into that space. How did that all play out for you?
Yeah, so I love this story because I got my real estate license because my husband was embarrassing me in front of real estate agents. So I'm from Mississippi. I'm from the South. I'm all about manners, and you light yourself on fire to make sure somebody else is warm. Like anyway, my husband is a New Yorker very much and came from owning bars in New York. So if he's got a problem, he's like breaking its knees. If I've got a problem, I'm like asking it what I can do for it to make it no longer be a problem. So
Yeah.
Anyway, very big difference in personalities there. So I just found that I kept having to tell agents like, oh, I'm sorry, he's not rude. He's just a New Yorker. And so I got my license to do our own deals with a little more speed, but also I was tired of having that conversation. So I got my license because my husband was embarrassing me. And what happened was our friends would say, oh, you're making how much on that cabin in the Smokies? Help me find one. Teach me how to manage it. And then it became friends of friends. And then it became true clients that I didn't know previously. And then all of a sudden I was the top producing agent in the Smokies. And then now we've got, we're one of the top 10 teams in the country, really just coming from a place of service and trying to, this is what worked for me. I'll teach you how to do it too. And that's just kind of been how we've grown it. But I thought being a real estate agent was like a total D-bag thing to be. Even when I got my license, I was like, I'm not going like marching out and putting signs in yards. And here we are.
Yeah. Not only signs in yards, signs across the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, well, my wife is from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm from Boston. So I know this dynamic that you speak
know the
of.
dynamic. Yes.
Yeah. I was like, what? It's actually funny from when I moved from Boston to the South and was like, these people are so nice, just so nice. And like learning that whole, the difference in interaction. And then the first time I brought her to Boston was a bit of an eye-opening experience. we were, I'll never forget this because we're going to a Red Sox game. We stopped at like, I don't remember, somewhere, and we're leaving and she held the door. But people just kept walking in and out. Like, no, I'm like still walking. I look back, she's standing there still holding the door for all the people. And I was like, you gotta let go. Come on, just let go of the door. Like they don't understand what you're doing.
Oh, that's cute. I love that story.
Yeah, it was just so funny. I was like, it's a little different here. Just let the door go. Someone will get their own door.
Oh, that's so funny.
It was pretty funny. But you got the license because your husband embarrassed you, but ultimately, like, now it's a large business. And so what was that transition like? How did you work through that? You go from doing your own deals to now having, quite a big presence. That must have taken some time and effort on scaling and stuff. How did that look for you?
Well, I mean, it did take years. It took years. And again, it was very organic. So I've never really said, oh, I don't really set sales goals. I don't set transaction goals. I just kind of let our clients and what they want and the questions that they ask lead the way. So we opened a second office, and the second one was in Destin, Florida, which is where I now live. because a lot of our clients would come to me, and we found that people typically, when they're successful with one property, they'll buy multiple. And when it's short-term vacation rentals, like what we do, they want a beach house and a mountain house and a lake house, and they want all these different ones. So we had several clients come to us and say, hey, Avery, I want to buy a house in Destin, Florida. I want a beach house. I've got my mountain house. Is there like a you there that you know that you can send me to? And so then I was like, well, our clients want one of us in Destin, Florida. So let's put somebody there. And then Gulf Shores, Alabama. And we just kind of grew it that way. So I would call our business very, very client led. So the steps that we take are really more to service them better than I'm going to be the biggest short-term rental agent in the country and I'm going to open all these offices. Like, we really just do things and make moves to better service our clients in the ways they want to be serviced. And that approach has worked well for us so far.
Yeah. I really would think that that'd be a good lesson for most businesses. Just lead with, not just numbers and KPIs and things, but if you're serving your customers the best that you possibly can, you're going to grow, you're going to have success. I think it's a great lesson from that. So what has it been like? There was a very notable boom in the short-term rental space where everybody was kind of jumping on board. I actually looked at some too. I was in contact with your agent Garrett in the North Carolina mountains. I never ended up. I think we put some offers in, never ended up getting one, and then things went south in the real estate market. And
yes, they did. South they went.
Right. What did you see? I'm. There's a lot you can see on social media. There's a lot you hear in the news. It was like, oh, Airbnb is dead. Like, it's never. Mm-hmm. But I don't really think that's the reality. I think there's always adaptations to be made. But what did you experience over the last couple of years?
Yeah. So there was a notable boom in all of real estate, not just short-term rentals, not just investment real estate, but primary home buying, because the interest rates were 2%. So, yeah. I mean, my Chihuahua could buy real estate then, and everybody did. And I think we saw it in short term specifically because people would say, wait, the payment on a beach house is going to be what? I've always wanted a beach house. Let me put it on Airbnb when I'm not using it, and it'll just print money. Yeah. Which, a very, very small part of that is true. You can put it on Airbnb to generate income when you're not using it, but you have to manage it right. You can't just slap it up. And statistically, 50% of all real estate investments are sold within the first year or first 2 years. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2, but either way, 50% of all of them, not just short term. So we had an extreme amount of people jumping in that kind of weren't treating this like the business that it is. And we saw it across all real estate. Then we've got that statistic of 50% of those are sold within the first year or two, which we've seen. And then the interest rates tripling over the course of 6 months, which is completely unprecedented in real estate, just killed the real estate market. And to give you guys an idea of just how badly it killed the real estate sales market, fewer homes were sold in 2023 and 24 than in the last 65 years. So there were fewer homes sold this year than in the Great Recession, the dot-com bubble, all of those things. So it's been really bad, and it's really because of the interest rates. So the demand is there, but everybody's just waiting because nobody wants to, or a lot of people who live in primary homes that want to trade up or even make a lateral move, it's going to cost them twice as much in a monthly payment as it would have a few years ago, and that's a hard pill for people to swallow. So what we saw is a lot of people jumping in that probably didn't need to be, and not properly strategizing. So I saw a lot of long-term investors in like suburban and metro markets who were changing their strategy, like taking all of their long terms and converting them to short terms, which I think was really stupid, to be honest. Like the type of market that I invest in short-term rentals, vacation markets only. So areas where really the only type of real estate, 90% of the real estate bought and sold over the past several decades has been vacation rentals and second homes. I don't like the strategy of just going into medium-sized metro markets, rural areas, suburban areas, and buying up a bunch of things that were not previously short-term rentals. It would have been primary homes or would have been long-term rentals and converting those. I like markets that have always been all short-term rentals, and you deal a little bit less with the human side of it, of like there was not going to be someone who I I just don't like people buying up what would be starter homes and turning them into short-term rentals. I think that's not cool. But anyway, you have better regulations and stuff in the vacation markets, and you have a better track record. And I think people buying in a lot of random markets, like I'm going to be the first Airbnb in Starkville, Mississippi. Well, there's a reason there's not a lot of them there. It's because there's only a very specific type of person that goes to Starkville, Mississippi, and that's a Mississippi State University alumni. So I think a lot of people just bought weird stuff, bought stuff a little too far from the attractions in the markets they were buying in, just because they wanted to get their foot in the door. And there were 100 offers on every single property, so they bought a little too far out. So I don't think that there's necessarily been a bust. If you look at the properties that I own and have owned since before COVID, so I've got two bedrooms in the Smokies that I've owned since 2015. And they peaked. The most amount of money they ever made was in 2021. They got a little over 90,000 gross each. Now they're back down to about 75,000 each. So if you look at that from 2021 to now, that looks like a bust. But if you move this axis over from 2020 to 2015, in 2015 and 2016, we were doing 45,000 each on those a year, and we were happy to get it. So we're still getting 75,000 each. That's an upward trend. It's not a bust, it's a blip. Yeah. But most people have not owned short-term rentals long enough to see that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And if you bought one at the height, and the first 6 months you made X dollars, and then the interest rates went up, everything slowed down. Like, it's just not gonna. You have to look at it over a longer time horizon. So that makes total sense. The piece about kind of buying in just not areas that are not already equipped to be sort of short-term rental spaces, vacation places, I think is such an important part. Like, all the different real estate strategies that there are, like, ultimately at the end of the day, the cliche of location is probably true. Like, in almost in every case could be one of the most important pieces. And so, as you mentioned, where you buy, they've had the regulations and are meant to be short-term rental based over decades. Whereas some of the people, I live in Los Angeles, and it's like there's been a ton of regulation change around people trying to short-term rental everything. And I think that's happened in a lot of the bigger cities. It's just not what cities want to have happen. And so do you see a scenario where that regulation comes to any of these vacation areas, or probably not, because it's been been the way it is for so long?
It 100% depends on your market. So, like, let's take Destin, where I live, for example. There's very little hotel presence. There's only 10,000 of us who live here full time. We get 8 million visitors a year to Destin. And then also 30A, which is actually where I live. 30A gets about 10. Panama City gets 8 to 10. And there's less than 20,000 people in each of those areas that live here. So then there's not really any hotels. So there's really only tourism. Every business in this area, every person, every household that is not retired depends on tourism dollars. So the local restaurants depend on the tourism coming in and staying in our vacation rentals to, go visit their restaurants. So these are, and Smoky Mountains, same way. So these are areas that the entire economy is dependent on the tourism and the short-term rentals to house the tourism. So, but if you get somewhere like Austin or Nashville, you've got a lot of really, really, really well-moneyed hotel lobbyists against short-term rentals. And then also there's the aspect of primary homeowners. So if you're in a market where the economy is not dependent on vacation rentals, then you don't care. Why do you care? You don't want any short-term rentals in your neighborhood. I make the majority of my money on short-term rentals, and I have chosen to live in a vacation market. And I still don't really want, a bunch of people in and out of the house next door to me where I'm trying to raise my kids. So I get that. I agree with that. So when you get in these metro markets where the economy is not dependent on tourism, there's all other kinds of industries, there's no reason for there to be any pushback on, hey, I live in Nashville. I lived on a quiet street. I'm trying to raise my kids, and Nashville's now the bachelorette party capital of the world. And I've got to explain to my 4-year-old why there's penis balloons all over the house next door. Like, I don't want that. I get it. So I feel like as regulations tighten in markets like that, then the vacation rental markets like Destin or the Smokies or Outer Banks, anybody can come up with any number of places, will become more valuable. Now, with that being said, there are some that you would think would be very pro short-term rental that kind of aren't, like Breckenridge, for example. But when you look a little deeper into Breckenridge, well, who controls the economy in Breckenridge? The ski resort. And the ski resort owns a lot of hotels, and they want people to stay there. So they're kind of controlling that. So you kind of have to look at wherever you're going to buy. I like to look at track record of short-term rentals. So if short-term rentals are kind of new to the area, like Nashville, for example, only in the past 10 years, I don't like that because that friction is happening now. But if you come down to a place like Destin, where my grandmother's been coming and renting vacation rentals in Destin since the 30s. She is 95 years old in hospice, and she's been coming here that long. So I like that track record. It means those battles were fought a long time ago, and you're not doing it now. So I like to see a long track record of vacation rental, of there being a lot of vacation rentals. But to kind of play devil's advocate to myself, a lot of these markets that have that are now being the ones being called saturated the most by people who haven't done well. So they're definitely, I like them. I think that they're the best place, especially for a newbie to start, because the whole area is so used to it. It's really easy to find vendors, very plug and play for a new person who's trying to learn a new business than going into trying to be the first short-term rental somewhere. And then you're learning a new business, and you're having to find like a housekeeper who's used to cleaning primary homes, and you have to teach them how to turn a vacation rental. It's different. And anyway, I could go on like that forever, obviously. But I think that as metro markets squeeze regulations, that vacation market real estate will become more valuable because it will be the last place that you can really do this.
Yeah.
And they're also the first place that you could do it. So
right. Makes sense. You mentioned that, kind of the running the business piece and the in a new market versus, one that's already equipped and you can plug in all the vendors. What do you recommend people do from a management standpoint? Do you recommend that they manage themselves, that they go out and get, I think along with this boom came a lot of, sort of third-party management services that you could utilize. But I guess it depends on what your goals are, but it does seem like they're also taking a fairly large percentage. So what do you do? What do you recommend people do? And kind of what's your position on managing these?
Great question. So if you're in it for cash flow only, then hiring a manager is probably not going to be something that's going to generate you much, if any, cash flow. Most of them charge 20%. And to give you some context, if I paid somebody 20% to run my 8 short-term rentals last year, I'd have paid them $250,000 on something a VA can do. So my advice there would be learn the business yourself. Then you can hire an offshore VA to help you with tasks and make things a lot easier without going the full service management route. But there has been a much needed disruption in the short-term rental management space. So when I started in the Smokies, there were only these big brick and mortar local management companies. There was nothing else because Airbnb was, and Vrbo wasn't just coming along. It started in 97, but it was just becoming something that people were doing. It was just becoming an option to not use a big brick and mortar property manager. Those guys were charging 40% of your gross income on these. So I used to be so back in those days, I was so anti-property manager. But with the rise of self-management and all of the property management software that you can use now and everything that makes it so much easier, and then the type of manager that has risen out of that, people that own short-term rentals, that understand optimizing on Airbnb. So, those property management companies back then would say, Airbnb, that's like for college kids renting their couches to each other. We're never going to post on Airbnb. And then now look at them. They have to. So a much more evolved type of manager has come out of this, that if you're somebody who just really doesn't want to mess with it, there are much better options for you management wise now than there were 10 years ago. So I'm not by any means anti-management, just depends on what your goals are. If you just want to have like a lifestyle asset, it's going to appreciate, throw it with a manager, let it put a dent in its own expenses, and actually making money is not your goal, great. There's plenty of managers out there for you. But if you're really looking at this as an investment and a business, you're going to want to self-manage.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to be able to cover all the tools that you use for that, but I mean, high level, what kind of time do you think self-managing, like maybe walk us through, like you purchase, what do people do? Obviously we've got to furnish it, kind of if it needs renovations, all that stuff, but like, how do you approach something, someone getting into their first short-term rental?
Yeah. So if you're buying in one of the big vacation markets, 9 times out of 10, it's going to come furnished. So you're not going to have to furnish from the ground up, but there will be some things you want to update or change. And you need, as far as personnel, you want to start with a good cleaner and a good handy person. You can build all the more specialized vendors, like if you need an HVAC tech or roofer, things like that, out from there. But you need to start with those 2 people. You need 3 pieces of software. You need a property management software or automation tool. So there's a lot of great ones out there. There's Hostaway, Hostfully. I use Hospitable personally. And what that does is it kind of automates everything. So it brings all of your listings on all the different platforms into one dashboard. So you only have to edit one time, syncs your calendar with your cleaner's calendar, which is such a big one for me, because back in the day, I had to, at the beginning of every month, look at our calendar and write out every date for our cleaner and send it to her. Now, when somebody books on Airbnb, it automatically puts it on her calendar. So that's great.
That's great. Yeah.
Helps with, there's a lot of like AI messaging in there now, so that if guests ask something, that it looks at your responses to previous questions that were the same and answers it that way. So you definitely need that. You need a pricing tool. I use Price Labs. You can use, there's Wheelhouse, Beyond Pricing. There's several of them out there, but that helps give you a range of where your pricing should be. Because if you just have one price all year, you're not going to optimize your money. We started making like 20% more when we started using a pricing tool than when we were manually pricing. And then the last thing is a digital guidebook. So those are really, really helpful because it sends to the guest when they book and tells them everything they need to know about the property before they get there. Like, oh, what kind of coffee do you have? Because that's something that I mess up on all the time. Like, I do not want, if I'm getting in late, hauling in 2 kids, and I stop and get the wrong kind of coffee on the way in, I'm going to be upset. It tells you where the closest grocery stores are, how far are things, how to work the thermostat. Like literally anything you could possibly need to know about the house will be in there, so that you can answer all those questions without having to just answer the same question 100 times like we used to. So that's the software, Wi-Fi thermostat, a Wi-Fi door lock. And I like a Ring camera on the front only. We don't do creepy around here, just the front to see who's coming and going. But those are really it. And as far as time commitment, it's very intense getting one set up. But once you've got it set up and you've got bookings rolling, it's less than an hour a week for one property.
Yeah, great. And you coach people on this, right? That's part of what you do, is help people, kind of get not just buy them, but coach them through kind of getting the rentals set up and everything, just so they would be able to use you as a resource in that scenario and some of your team.
Yes. We teach all of our buyers how to manage their property for free.
Okay, perfect. Important for people to know that. Well, let me switch gears. I want to ask you the questions that I ask each guest. The first one is name of the show is Know Your Why. And so I always like to ask everybody, kind of what is your why? We have, you obviously have had a lot of success, made a lot of, sort of impact in the short-term rental space. I don't think, I would imagine that anyone who has a short-term rental has probably heard your name, spoken with your team, knows something. So what's your why? What kind of keeps driving you at this point?
So family, kids. So leaving that corporate job and having all of our real estate investments, but creating my own business, my own active income, allows me to, and Luke, to give our kids like a 2-parent, stay-at-home parent experience. Like we both, sometimes we ride together to go pick them up in the afternoon. And one of these days that's going to start embarrassing them. But, if somebody wakes up sick, it's like, not a big deal. Nobody has to call. As a matter of fact, my husband will like race me and he'll be like, no, mama, you go get work done. We're going to watch Price is Right all day. And, a lot of dads don't have the ability to do that. They've got to get to the office. So being able to have our own journey and our own just lifestyle design so that we are both there for our kids, probably a little too there. Again, they're probably going to start getting annoyed with us here pretty soon. But that's really it. If we want to drop everything and go to Disney World next week, we can do that. So that freedom of time to spend with family is most important. And that's 100% our why, both of us.
Yeah. That's, I told you before we were recording that my daughter was sick, and it was like, those things come up and you think about like the difference in, what the response to that is now than it was sort of pre-becoming an entrepreneur and having complete time or control of time. So it's like, you just, I think it's such an overlooked piece of why people get into entrepreneurship or real estate or whatever, like just being able to be in control of how that day looks. And you as you mentioned, like you have a sick kid, you want to go somewhere, you don't have to ask someone else, right? It's like, I got to check with my boss. That's me. I get to check with me on it. So yeah, it's a pretty cool thing once you realize that. When people want to connect with you, what's the best place?
Yeah. So our website, theshorttermshop.com, Instagram, that is actually me checking Instagram. So it's at The Short Term Shop. I've got a YouTube channel / The Short Term Shop. And I think that covers everything. Got a new book coming out on Bigger Pockets Publishing in about a month or two. And it's on optimizing your existing short-term rentals. So the last one was about how to choose markets and how to buy and kind of a primer. And this one's a little more technical. And you can pick that up or pre-order it at biggerpockets.com/smarterstr.
Awesome. We'll get all that stuff in the show notes so people can find you and find your book. Avery, this is great. I know there's tons more things that we could be covering too, but I want to make sure people should definitely connect with you, get your book if they have really any interest. I truly, like I said, I used someone from your team. I was considering short-term rental. I still would like to at some point, but I just think the experience was great, and so I think I can speak sort of firsthand to anyone thinking about getting in the space. To you and your team is a good resource. So thank you for being here. Thank you for kind of sharing what you did. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
And folks listening, please like, rate, and review the show. Make sure you connect with Avery. She's got her own podcast. And thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?